Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a YouTube video called Capitalism, a love story from the Starlight Channel.
That's right. We've got the transcript here.
And our mission, really, is to unpack the main ideas about capitalism presented in this film, looking at its promises versus, well, what the video argues are its actual effects on people.
And it kicks off with a pretty bold comparison, doesn't it, right at the start?
Yeah, it does.
It draws this parallel between the fall of the Roman Empire and potentially us. It mentions things like dependency on slaves, massive wealth gaps, entertainment to distract people.
Right, and leaders may be thinking they're above the law.
Exactly. It kind of asks, are we seeing echoes of that now? It suggests these big societal challenges, inequality, power imbalances. They aren't exactly new.
It's definitely a way to grab your attention, and then bam, it pivots straight to these incredibly personal stories. Real people, real impact.
Yeah, the eviction footage. Sandra, Robert, Chris, Audra, David Phillips. It's pretty raw.
And you see the carpenter, the guy actually boarding up the house. He looks visibly uncomfortable, conflicted.
And Sandra's reaction, losing her home, her family's farming heritage tied to that land.
Yeah.
It makes foreclosure feel less like a statistic and more, personal.
Totally. And it's not just that one family. There's the other guy.
Oh, right. The one who thought he had 30 days.
Yeah. And then the police officer just casually tells him, nope, house is already sold. His shock versus the officer's sort of detachment. The video uses that to highlight a certain coldness, maybe.
A bureaucratic coldness, yeah. And then, speaking of cold, Peter Zalewski, condo vultures.
Oof. Yeah. That section is something else.
He's completely open about his business model. Buying foreclosed homes for pennies on the dollar.
Zero apologies. He literally uses the vulture analogy himself, right? Picking the carcass clean.
He does, and talks about using data to find these opportunities, framing capitalism purely as taking. It's a stark portrayal.
It really is. The video seems to use him to embody that pure profit motive, kind of detached from the human cost.
Right. It sets up this question early on. What happens when profit is the only thing that matters?
Okay, so after hitting us with these really impactful negative consequences, the video then tries to step back and ask, well, what is capitalism? What's free enterprise supposed to be?
And that's where they bring in Wally Shawn.
With the small town analogy.
Yeah, the shops in town and how choosing where you spend your money is like casting a vote, shaping society. It's a simple way to explain market forces.
It makes sense. But then Shawn adds the caveat.
Right. He points out the core idea. Businesses run on profit. That's the engine. But he also highlights this inherent tension.
That people who already have stuff, have money, find it easier to get more money within this system.
Exactly. Which leads almost inevitably to inequality. That's a key point. The video keeps returning to this sort of built-in tendency for wealth to concentrate.
Which leads perfectly into that whole section about the post-World War II era. The filmmaker talks about his own dad.
At General Motors, yeah.
Well,
union job.
Stable job, paid off the house early, new car every few years, vacations, Catholic school, healthcare.
Free healthcare and dental, college without loans, paid vacations, savings, a pension.
It sounds almost unreal today, doesn't it? Like a completely different world.
It really does. And the video points to a couple of key factors back then.
Like the tax rate?
Yeah, the top marginal tax rate was incredibly high, like 90%. And that funded massive public projects, dams, highways, schools, the space program.
Infrastructure we still use?
Right. Plus, American industry didn't have the same intense global competition right after the war. GM was dominant.
So a very different economic landscape. It makes you think about what's changed.
Definitely. But the video argues there was a shift in mindset, too. It shows that clip, the Debbie Downer speech.
Oh, yeah, warning about, too much consumerism.
Exactly. Getting too focused on stuff, defining ourselves by what we own. The video presents this as a cultural turning point, away from maybe collective good towards individual consumption.
A shift in values. Kind of.
Sort of. Moving away from just producing things to needing to have things.
And then the focus shifts sharply to the Reagan era.
The video portrays Reagan as, well, already deeply connected to corporate interests before he even became president.
And then pushing policies designed to help banks and corporations.
Yeah, it lists things like big tax cuts for the wealthy, deregulation,
The decline of manufacturing, even while companies were profitable.
weakening unions, wages stagnating for average workers.
More debt, more bankruptcies.
Higher incarceration, more antidepressant use, rising healthcare costs. It paints a picture of a deliberate restructuring of the economy.
A fundamental shift is how the film frames it, arguing these policies increased inequality and hurt the average person, moving away from that post-war model.
And Flint, Michigan, the filmmaker's hometown, becomes a central case study for this.
Right, GM making record profits.
While slashing jobs in Flint. Thousands of jobs.
And that interview with the GM lobbyist, Tom Kay.
Yeah, basically saying, look, we have to cut jobs to stay competitive, even if it guts the town.
It's presented as this stark choice: corporate competitiveness versus community well-being.
And the film clearly critiques that choice. It uses Flint and mentions cities like Cleveland and Detroit, too, as examples of the human cost of deindustrialization.
And it gets personal again. The filmmaker trying to talk to GM executives.
And visiting the closed plant where his dad worked for over 30 years.
His dad just remembering the people, his coworkers.
It makes the economic statistics feel very grounded, very human.
Absolutely. It contrasts that memory of a functioning workplace, a community, with the closed factory and the hardship that followed. Makes it tangible.
Then, shifting forward in time, the video covers the Republic windows and doors strike in Chicago, 2008.
Right, the workers getting fired abruptly. Little notice, no severance pay owed.
And their reaction, deciding to occupy the factory.
The sit-down strike, demanding what they were legally owed. It's shown as this really powerful moment of workers fighting back.
A clash, really. Labor versus capital when things get tough. It raises questions about fairness and power, definitely. And right around then, the video directly tackles the big debate. Is capitalism good or bad?
It shows President Bush saying it's the best system ever devised.
Then immediately cuts to other voices calling it, greed, exploitation, failure.
So it lays out the opposing arguments clearly. The freedom argument for capitalism.
The freedom to choose work, buy and sell.
Versus the critique, focusing on negative outcomes and, well, greed.
Then it takes a really dark turn, the PA childcare scandal.
Yeah. Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. This part is deeply disturbing.
The film alleges that Judge Conahan shut down the public juvenile facility.
And then directed kids to a for-profit center, PA Childcare.
Owned by a guy named Robert Powell. And then Judge Ciavarella allegedly had this incredibly high conviction rate.
Sending kids, often for minor things, to that for-profit place.
And the video alleges the judges got millions in kickbacks while the owners made tens of millions from taxpayers.
It's horrific. The stories of the kids, McGee for smoking pot, Matt for throwing food.
Jamie for a fight, Hillary for a MySpace page, getting long sentences, feeling like an item for profit.
It's presented as this extreme example of the profit motive corrupting a fundamental public service justice.
A truly shocking allegation about prioritizing money over kids' well-being.
Then there's a shift in tone, looking at Captain Sullenberger.
Sully, yeah.
Right.
The hero pilot of the Hudson River landing.
A national hero. But the video immediately pivots to the financial struggles of airline pilots.
Right. Pay cuts after bankruptcies, pensions terminated, really low starting pay for new pilots.
So needing food stamps, working second jobs.
Dog walking, delivering Jews, donating plasma. It's a stark contrast, isn't it?
Totally. This highly skilled, safety-critical job, and the people doing it are facing economic hardship.
The video uses it to show how even skilled professionals aren't immune to cost-cutting pressures. And it raises safety concerns, too, the farming out of flights to lower-paid regional carriers.
Like the Continental Connection flight that crashed.
Flight 3407. The video suggests the focus was put on pilot error, perhaps overlooking the economic pressures contributing to fatigue or lack of experience.
It's a complex picture. Then, another really unsettling topic. Corporate-owned life insurance.
Dead peasant insurance, as it's grimly nicknamed.
The story of Irma Johnson. Her husband Dan dies, and she finds out his employer, Amity Bank, had taken out a $1.5 million policy on his life, naming itself the beneficiary, without her knowledge.
It's chilling. An attorney explains these policies companies literally profiting when their employees die.
Secretly. And the list of companies the video alleges did this. Big names.
American Greetings, Walmart, Bank of America, Citibank, Hershey, AT&T. It goes on.
The Walmart case. LaDonna Smith dies, Walmart gets $81,000 while her family struggles with bills. It feels so wrong.
The video presents it as fundamentally unethical, questioning the valuation of human life when profit is involved.
Then the film brings in moral and religious viewpoints.
Yeah, Father Dick Preston from Flint calling capitalism evil, contrary to religious teachings.
Another priest calling it immoral, obscene, radically evil.
Bishop Thomas Gumbleton questioning if the system really provides for everyone's well-being, citing Jesus' focus on the poor.
And the idea is raised that maybe people are convinced, through propaganda, to support a system that doesn't actually benefit them.
Though it does briefly acknowledge the counterargument, some voices claiming American capitalism is morally right, compatible with God's laws, but the focus is definitely on the critique.
Then it introduces this term, plutonomy,
Right, based on what the video claims were internal Citigroup memos from around 2005-2006.
describing the U.S. economy as being controlled by the richest 1%.
Yeah, saying the top 1% had more wealth than the bottom 95% combined. And the video suggests these memos were almost gloating about it.
Like a new aristocracy, but also nervous.
Exactly. Nervous that the other 95%, the non-rich, might demand a bigger slice of the pie, worried about the power of the vote.
So the wealthy are happy with the American dream narrative because it keeps people striving, maybe keeps them from demanding systemic change.
That's the implication presented, that the dream itself might be a tool to maintain the status quo of inequality.
Which logically leads to the next big question the video raises. Is it democracy versus capitalism?
And they quote Stephen Moore from the Wall Street Journal, apparently saying capitalism is more important than democracy.
Which is a provocative statement.
It is. The video then contrasts that by pointing out the U.S. Constitution doesn't mention capitalism, but does talk about we the people and the general welfare.
And it explores alternatives, like workplace democracy.
Yeah, showing examples of successful worker-owned co-ops, Isthmus Engineering, a California bread factory, places where workers have more say, maybe fairer wages.
Suggesting democratic principles can apply to the economy, not just politics.
Right, presenting it as a potential alternative model.
The video also makes a point about altruism, actions beyond just profit.
Dr. Jonas Salk is the prime example, giving away the polio vaccine.
Didn't patent it, didn't try to make billions, just gave it away for the common good.
A stark contrast to the next point the video makes.
About top math and science graduates.
Going into finance instead of science or engineering?
Driven partly by huge student loan debt, needing those high finance salaries.
And the video argues that a lot of what happens in high finance isn't actually productive for society, maybe even destructive.
Which sets up the dive into the financial crisis itself. Derivatives, credit default swaps.
Yeah, the casino economy section, trying to understand these incredibly complex financial instruments.
They talk to a former Lehman Brothers VP, Marcus Haupt,
who explains derivatives basically as side bets on bets, gambling.
And the video emphasizes how confusing it all is, maybe deliberately so.
Right, and connects it back to the housing market Alan Greenspan, encouraging people to tap your home equity, refinance.
Leading to predatory lending, the subprime mortgage mess.
The film is harsh on deregulation here. That photo with the chainsaw.
Symbolizing the destruction of financial regulations, yeah. And it describes lenders like Countrywide, using mafia-like tactics.
And again, showing the human cost. Foreclosures, families losing homes, like the hackers in Peoria.
And that really bitter irony, Flint, Michigan, already devastated by deindustrialization.
Becomes a processing center for foreclosure notices for the rest of the country, just piling on the misery.
It's presented as a system feeding on itself.
Yeah.
Then comes the bailout.
The $700 billion. The video calls it a heist.
It focuses on the fear tactics used to push it through Congress. Warnings of total collapse.
And the closed-door meetings between government officials like Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson, former Goldman Sachs CEO, and the Wall Street banks.
The proposal itself was apparently just 3 pages long. Rushed, minimal oversight, waiving laws.
Congressional members describing the immense pressure, the fear. It initially failed.
Because of public outrage, right? People calling their representatives.
Yeah. But then a quick backroom deal and it passed. The video raises the alarm about a financial coup d'etat.
The idea that Wall Street basically took control of the government's response.
And the lack of transparency afterward? Where did the money really go? Citigroup buying a corporate jet, Goldman Sachs bonuses, AIG executives having lavish meetings.
The filmmaker even tries to make a citizen's arrest at AIG and demand the money back. It's symbolic, but shows the anger.
That anger, that discontent is the next theme.
You see growing public frustration with the wealthy, with Wall Street.
Wally Shawn pops up again, observing that the super rich were playing games that ended up hurting everyone else.
And then the election of Barack Obama. The video notes the immediate backlash, the fear of socialism.
Yeah, any attempt at regulation or social programs being labeled as socialist.
But it also shows Senator Bernie Sanders defining democratic socialism.
As wanting democracy to extend into the economy, challenging corporate power.
And the film notes a shift in public opinion, especially among young people, becoming more open to socialist ideas.
seeing it as a potential answer to the perceived failures of the current system.
But it's not all just critique. The video does highlight some acts of resistance, some signs of hope,
Like Sheriff Warren Evans in Detroit putting a stop to foreclosure evictions.
or the Trody family in Miami resisting eviction, with their neighbors actually coming out to support them.
And revisiting the Republic windows and doors workers, their sit-down strike.
Bishop James Wilkowski supporting them.
President Obama even making a statement supporting their right to severance pay.
And eventually, they won. The bank agreed to pay them what they were owed. It's shown as a victory for collective action.
A powerful example, and the film connects this directly to history.
The Flint's sit-down strike of 1936-37.
Right. Auto workers occupying GM plants for 44 days, a huge moment in labor history.
Leading to the UAW being recognized, helping build the American middle class.
And the video notes that the National Guard was called in not to break the strike, but to protect the workers from police and company thugs. And FDR supported their right to organize.
A very different government response than perhaps we might see today.
That's the implication, which
Yeah.
leads to the final major point. FDR's proposed Second Bill of Rights.
From his 1944 State of the Union address.
Yeah, proposing economic rights, the right to a job, adequate food and clothing, a decent home, medical care, education, freedom from economic fear.
A vision for economic security as a right of citizenship.
But as the video points out, these rights were never really enacted into law in the U.S. after the war.
While similar rights were included in the post-war constitutions of Germany, Italy, Japan,
Interesting contrast. The film uses this to build its final argument.
that the current system, as it exists, primarily enriches a very small group at the expense of the vast majority.
And it concludes pretty bluntly, arguing that capitalism, or at least this form of it, is an evil that can't just be regulated.
But needs to be replaced by democracy, extending democratic principles into the economy.
Ending with that call for a citizen's arrest of those deemed responsible for the financial crisis and playing the international. It's a strong, provocative ending.
Absolutely. So wrapping up our deep dive into this video's perspective, it paints a picture of capitalism filled with contradictions. We see the potential for prosperity, sure, but heavily contrasted with stories of eviction, job loss, financial instability, and serious ethical questions.
It really forces you to confront these different facets. The video presents arguments ranging from capitalism being the best system to it being inherently exploitative or even evil.
So, for you listening, considering everything presented in the source, the critiques, the defenses, the human stories, what aspects of the system described raise the most questions for you? What seems beneficial? What seems problematic?
And how might those ideas we touched on, things like more democracy in the workplace or thinking about economic security as a fundamental right like FDR proposed, how might those ideas actually change the way our economy works if they were implemented? Lots to chew on there.